One of the lasting legacies of the George W. Bush presidency was the alliance of interests of evangelical Christians and politically conservative Jews. And in some ways, his speech tonight to a somewhat fringy evangelical group is a reminder the evangelical movement, millions and millions of Americans, was front and center during the Bush presidency. And while the press doesn't cover evangelicals much anymore, they have not gone anywhere. They are still a driving force in the base of the Republican Party. Joining me now is Ralph Reed. He's chairman of the Faith and Freedom Coalition. He was a senior advisor to the Bush-Cheney campaigns in 2000, 2004. Perhaps there's no one in America people associate more with the political muscle of evangelical Christianity than you, Mr. Reed. And my question first, I want to talk about where things stand right now for evangelical Christians as a political force in this country. But the first question is just about this speech. Do you understand why people are a bit roiled by the former president giving a speech to this group?
Well, setting aside for a minute tonight's speech, I certainly understand why Jews are sensitive about the issue of targeted proselytization. You have to remember, Chris, I grew up in Miami, so I grew up going to more bar mitzvahs than baptisms. And I grew up with the children of Holocaust survivors. And for Jews, particularly those who came from Europe and from countries and parts of the world with a long and a brutal history of persecution of Jews, which was associated in many cases, remember, with Christianity. Right. There is a history, and the only thing that really compares to it in the cosmology of the view of a past would be the racism that African Americans have dealt with. So I certainly understand why for Jews this is an extremely sensitive topic. And I think what Christians have to do as a result is they have to show the appropriate sensitivity to that very sad and tragic past in which, unfortunately, our forebears, or at least those claiming to be our forebears, played a role. And I think in exchange, our friends in the Jewish community, of which we have many, and by the way, not all who share our politics. Right. We have many friends in the Jewish community, and we engage in regular dialogue with them. I think they need to understand that in order to be authentic to our faith, we have to share the gospel with everyone. With everyone. So, and that's right. I mean, you can't ask a Christian going door to door in their neighborhood, not the best metaphor, but for purposes of this discussion, to bypass a certain home or certain homes because of who lives there. But that's a little different than what's happening here, right? I mean, just as a sort of institutional question, I understand that. I understand the importance, the theological importance of proselytization from the evangelical Christian perspective. But sure, you have these sort of institutional setups, groups like this, that are specific, that are targeted to specifically to Jews. Yeah, that's right, and that's where, you know, the dialogue gets more complicated. I've never, frankly, been somebody who would tell a Jew who was a convert that they couldn't share their faith. I would never do that. But as I said, as a general rule, it is my view that targeted proselytization can raise these kinds of sensitivities in a way that becomes counterproductive to sharing the gospel. But again, I think people have got to understand that Jesus was a Jew. The early Christians were Jews. Right. So we believe that we came out of that tradition, and I think we need to show sensitivity to their fears and concerns, and I think they need to accept the fact that to be authentic to our faith, we have to share our faith. I want to ask you about this poll, because I remember in the years of the Bush administration, the talk of evangelical Christians and their political might was everywhere. It was on the cover of Time magazine. It was one of the dominant narratives of politics for the aughts, for that decade. And I saw this poll that comes from Pew. A majority of evangelical leaders believe influence is declining. 82% say they're losing influence. 17% say they're gaining influence. What do you think about the political force of evangelicals in this country at a time when we're seeing marriage equality on the march, when we're seeing Ken Cuccinelli lose in Virginia? Do you think influence of evangelicals is declining? No, I don't. I think that in many ways today, compared to, say, 20 or 30 years ago in particular, it's more kind of baked into the cake. And that's really true of all social reform movements. I mean, I think the civil rights movement and civil rights leaders have as much influence today as they did in the 50s or 60s, but you don't have the same drama of a march on Washington or the Montgomery bus boycott. I think you have feminists like Dianne Feinstein and others who are serving in the U.S. Senate and Congress, Nancy Pelosi, who I think would identify herself as a feminist, but it doesn't seem to be as grating to the ear or the eye as, say, when the feminist movement broke on the scene in the 60s.
So you're saying the power of evangelicals has been institutionalized in a way which sort of accounts for us not seeing as so distinct. Ralph Reed from the Faith and Freedom Coalition, thank you so much. It was great to have you on.